welcome to the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Matt Delaney. Joining me this week again, Tracy. We've got at least one line open right now, and Bill on the line?
Yeah.
How you doing, Bill?
Doing well. What do you think about the new state law that Bible classes will be taught in high school? Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
As long as they're not promoting the religion. If it's like, for example, there's some courses that are taught from a literary standpoint. I personally don't have a problem with it. I think it affects literature in a big way. When I was very young, I read the Bible, and it did help me with my understanding of a lot of literature.
I've been a proponent of teaching the Bible as literature and potentially other uses as long as there's no proselytizing in public schools forever. I do, however, have a problem with what the school board just did. What they did was say, we're going to require schools in Texas to offer a Bible course as an elective. Now, from a financial and realistic perspective, that puts an undue strain on some schools. But they also did not establish any curriculum or any guidelines for this, leaving that up to the schools. This was their way of making sure that the school board itself didn't broach the First Amendment and violate church-state separation. Now what you've got is unenforceable situation with no guidelines, no oversight, and you're basically saying you're all figure it out. That's the wrong.
Well, the reason I think personally that they did it that way was to that would be brought in regards to evolution. So they teach evolution, okay, and they have actual books that have been approved by the State Board of Education that is valid to be, or it has been okayed to be used to teach these kids about evolution. So if they do that with the Bible classes, then you will have more attention brought to those books and say, well, this may not be true, that may not be true.
But that's what has to happen.
But it doesn't happen with evolution. People just kind of blow it off and say, well, I think the kids were told that's kind of a theory, and so they're kind of safe from that.
No. The board, no. And saying sure doesn't counter this.
Textbooks have to be approved by the state board. The Board of Education has a curriculum. We're one of the adoption states where the state determines what textbooks are used in every school. They're making an exception from that. The evolution standards are in there. And by the way, they're going to be up for review in the fall. And Don McElroy and his cronies of young earth creationism on the State Board of Education, watch out for them, because they may be about ready to screw over the education of students in Texas. And we'll be taking a look at that as we get closer to the fall. But the science
is changed is because if they continued to teach what they thought 20 years ago, they would look like total fools.
Well, that's what I
just said. Our understanding has changed.
But science doesn't change. Like 20 years ago, the tire was still a tire. It was made out of rubber, and it was still you knew what a tire was.
No, you're talking about the factual case.
What about Newtonian physics and circular orbits? And yes, the models change.
They change. That's the fundamental fact of science. Is
How
that
many
when we
planets
get new
are there
information,
now?
Yeah. Hello. And by the way, we need to ask that question quickly because Pluto, along with a couple others, may become planets again, and we would have gone from 8 to 9 to 8 to possibly 11.
My point exactly. Don't put too much faith in that science
I'm not
you
putting
get in high school. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not putting.
Who's putting faith?
I'm not putting faith in it. You are.
I'm not putting faith in it. I consider it as a theory from the start. I'm not considering it as science. Going, well, I'm gonna base my whole existence on the fact that I evolved from a fish. And so I'm not much credibility into the theory of evolution, but because it's some kind of state approved book, I all of a sudden have to consider it as evidence and science. From a scientific community standpoint, that I can go and have a debate and feel like this is strong evidence that we evolved from a fish, and I'm gonna teach a whole generation of kids that that's what it is, and then 20 years later,
it's the truth. You're done. It's evolution isn't just a theory. Evolution is a fact. Change over time is a fact.
The theory of evolution by natural selection is the model that describes the process. That is constantly refined. It's possible, although almost absurdly unlikely, that we may eventually find information that drastically overturns the theory of evolution by natural selection. Highly unlikely. And the reason for that is because we're continuing to increase our understanding, and all the evidence builds on and supports what we have before. The science standards change in part for political reasons and religious reasons when there's opposition, but because the understanding of the world is constantly changing. Science is a process. The best current explanation is the one that is most reliable. And if you don't think so, and if you're dismissive, then you should have tuned in for the first couple of minutes of the show when I talked about how science took us to the moon 39 years ago today. Your absurdly dismissive tone with regard to science, as if, oh, there's no reason to teach this as fact, is insane. It would be the same as saying, there's no reason to say if we teach students that if we drop a pin it's going to fall, because we don't know everything about gravity or how it works. Yeah, that's the process. That's right. The scientific process, is to come up with that understanding. Science standards do change, the books change, our understanding changes. Yours evidently does not.